We are going live. Welcome everyone to the Pulse of Israel show here in the ancestral and eternal homeland of the Jewish people. Live here with political insider, political consultant, Knesset insider, Jeremy Saltan. Moadim L'Simcha. Jeremy, how are you today?
Well, Moadim L'Simcha, I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing on this very interesting day?
Well, enjoying the Chag, enjoying being home with the family, dealing with the Corona lockdown, being home, waiting to find out if and when we have a government. And we definitely have some excitement going on, as if we didn't have excitement up until now. From what I understand, President Rivlin just announced that he is not giving Gantz the 2 weeks extension he asked for, right? He only has 15 or 16 seats, and he was asking for an extension based on knowing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would be Prime Minister or the first in a rotation. Made no logic whatsoever. President Rivlin said, no, sorry, you have no chance of putting together a government. But for the first time ever in Israeli history, if I'm not mistaken, he did not give it over to the other person who potentially can make a government, which is Prime Minister Netanyahu, who now is 59, because Orly Levy today said she is basically joining the right-wing bloc. And he said, that's it, I'm not giving it to Netanyahu. Instead, 22 days left to make a government. What just happened? What did we just witness, Jeremy?
What we just had was Rivlin deciding about an hour ago that he had received a letter from Benny Gantz last week in which Benny Gantz asked to have an extension of the mandate. Let's make sure that all of our viewers are able to have a very quick recap. After the election, what happened was the president had all of the factions come and give in their nominations. 61 nominations went to Gantz. 58 nominations went to Netanyahu, and one nomination abstained. That was Orly Levy. What happened afterwards is that, as by law, when someone has 61 or more nominations, Rivlin gave the first mandate to form the government, this time to Gantz. The first two elections, we had Netanyahu get the first mandate. Here, Benny Gantz got it. Now, we talked about this last time, that even though Benny Gantz has the mandate, the 61 people who recommended him are not the same 61 people who would actually vote him in for a Knesset, confidence vote to become prime minister. They were there in order to block Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, what happened in the meantime, and it actually happened later the last time we spoke, is that Benny Gantz dismantled Blue and White, and we had a situation where the 33 seats are now divided up 17 and 16, in which Gantz has the slightly larger group. Now, on Tuesday at midnight, the end of his mandate is supposed to come to an end. When this happens, what we will see is the letter of Rivlin either going forward or not. Let's talk a little bit about what Rivlin's options were ahead of this letter. Now, according to the law, there are three options that the president has if he's being asked to have an extension of the first mandate. There's no extension for a second mandate. There's no extension for a third mandate. Only when it comes to the first mandate is there an opportunity to be able to extend it. He can extend it to 14 days. He can extend it to less. He can make a decision to be, if you will, very annoying about it and extend it 24 hours at a time until the end of the 14-day period and ask for constant updates. That's the first option in terms of the options of if he wants to extend the mandate and give that to Benny Gantz. The second option that he has there is to go ahead and hold consultations. And by holding consultations, he can go ahead and ask all the people if they've changed their mind. We already saw the letter that came out earlier today where Orly Levy, who had previously abstained, said she's now made up her mind and she's joining the right-wing bloc, which now is up to 59 seats. So that's one option to be able to do it. Another way is just to forego on the consultations and decide that you are going to give the second mandate to whoever finished second place in the votes. This is what Rivlin did last time when he gave Benny Gantz the chance to form a government with the second mandate. It's always, and if the first mandate did not work,
Jeremy, we
instead
lost
of
you.
giving it to Gantz,
Jeremy, can you repeat the last sentence because we lost what you were saying?
can you tell me where you where it got cut out?
Why don't you start again in terms of Orly Levy, what she wrote today in terms of now having 59?
Okay, so Orly Levy decided to go ahead and move over to the right-wing bloc. That left Rivlin with three options. I summarized the first two. The first option is to extend it for Benny Gantz, and there are different variants of that option. The second one is to give the second mandate to Netanyahu. And again, there are different variants. If he wants, he can go the consultation route, or Levy can officially do it in his residence, so on and so forth. And then there's the third option, which is to say that he's not giving a second mandate. That's something that's never been done before. And usually, again, you either have a situation where the first person is able to form the government, or you have a situation where the second one is. We had this very weird situation where that didn't work either time last time. But what we have now is a situation where Rivlin is deciding not to give the second mandate and to fast forward and move us to the point in which we are in the 21 days before the final mandate. The third mandate, which is the third because usually it comes after the second, would in this case be potentially the second mandate. You have 21 days from the minute that Gantz's mandate would end. During those 21 days, any MK would have the opportunity of the 120 to go ahead and provide 61 signatures to the Speaker's house, which is now Benny Gantz. And that would be given to the president. There's a 48-hour time period in which they would verify the signatures. Also, if you have more than one candidate that produced 61 signatures, they would ask the candidates that signed on more than one slip who it is that they're nominating. After that procedure would be over, we would go on to 14 days of the last mandate, and the Speaker, which is again Benny Gantz, would have the opportunity to delay the vote for up to another week. But what Rivlin is doing here is he's trying to skip the whole point in the middle, which is the 14-day extension, which is the 48 hours, which can come out on 3 calendar days in between for consultations, which he can use between the first and the second mandate, and the 28 days of the second mandate. So what he's doing here is pretty much cutting out 6 weeks of the negotiation process. Why is this important? We know that we're dealing with Corona. We're having a Skype interview, and instead of me being in your offices, because you're not allowed to go there. So the situation in which he's deciding to cut out a lot of this point of negotiations is difficult because if we do end up going to a new election, it could potentially put us in a situation and a calendar in which we would not be able to actually go out and vote in them. But B, instead of actually dealing with the coronavirus at its perhaps peak and most important points, instead of having an extension so that the government can actually deal with that, what the president would be doing is forcing everybody to go ahead and try to come to a deal on his timeline, which is very short and would not allow the actual running of the government during this very difficult time, coming to a lot of the decisions that need to be made crucially over the next few days. As you know, we're celebrating Chol Moed. There's a big question right now if after we celebrate the end of Pesach, if we're going to go out of our homes, if we're not going to go out of our homes. All of these discussions are now going to be delayed because for the next couple days, even less than that, we're going to be seeing marathon negotiations between Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu. Everybody else, because remember, it's not just about them, it's UTJ, Shas, Yamina. No one has a coalition agreement in hand. Labor, which had just merged into blue and white. A lot of things that are going on, not enough time to actually be able to deal with any of it. So, I put this out on both Facebook and Twitter, but, I'll say this and then I'll get your reaction on what I had to say. In my opinion, what President Rivlin is doing here is taking a big gamble by not extending Gantz's mandate, conducting a second round of consultations, or granting the second mandate, because he might reconsider this at the last moment. Because if his gamble fails, we are all going to go to a fourth election, and it's going to be his fault. Because justifiably, both sides will say, we wanted more time. And the response that will be coming from the president is, oh, I thought I gave you enough time and whatever, but both of them will be able to say justifiably, we were dealing with more important things. Instead of acting presidential, you didn't give us the time to be able to deal with it. Now we're going to an election and it's your head.
It's very interesting that you raised that point in terms of forcing this pressurized time to be focused on making the government takes away time for dealing with Corona. I heard another point that I'd love to hear your feedback about. By what President Rivlin did, instead of Gantz only having 1 day left, not only to try to make an agreement with Netanyahu, he also only has 1 day left to try to push forward his, from my perspective, anti-democratic legislation that would be personally against Netanyahu, forbidding him from being able to put together a government. Rivlin's decision right now of not giving Netanyahu the chance to form a government and jumping straight to the third mandate, as you explained, means that Gantz has another 2 weeks to use this as pressure against Netanyahu to push forward his legislation that would forbid, again, the anti-Bibi coalition of potentially 61, to forbid Bibi Netanyahu from becoming prime minister or being able to put together a government. What do you say about that?
So, it's interesting point. I did see that on social media. That's not exactly accurate. We have to point out that no matter what, the 21 days were going to happen at any point unless we had a government before that, meaning whether we have the second mandate or we don't have the second mandate, unless Gantz resigns, the current law says that you need 90 votes to remove him as speaker. He is going to be the speaker until he decides to resign as part of whatever agreement to take the defense ministry or whatever other ministry is given to him as part of a coalition deal. He, during those 21 days, can pursue that legislation. Now, if he pursues that legislation now in the next day or two, or if he does so after Netanyahu gets his second mandate, for Netanyahu's perspective, he believes that if he has the second mandate, that he will be able to figure out a way to bring Benny Gantz into the coalition. But one of the things we should talk about is there are alternative coalitions for him to go ahead and form. Now that Orly Levy is there at 59 seats, that's a very big deal. So there are people who are saying, oh, by going ahead and making the decision that Rivlin is skipping to the 21 days, so that gives Rivlin the opportunity to go ahead and allow Gantz to pursue this legislation. Well, first of all, even if Netanyahu has the second mandate, Gantz can still move forward on the legislation to prevent him from forming a government. Of course, it will look ridiculous considering that Netanyahu is with the mandate. If anything, that could force and facilitate conversations between other MKs to be able to form a right-wing government. But it's two separate tracks. Gantz is speaker at any point. He can go ahead and pursue the legislation. It's obviously easier for him to do it if Netanyahu doesn't have the mandate. But assuming that Netanyahu is also not able to form a government in the second mandate because Benny Gantz waits for the 21 days anyway, then it's irrelevant whether the 21 days happen. What's important in terms of alternative coalitions, and this is something that I do think we should spend time on, is that besides Benny Gantz, one of the things that happened with the splitting of blue and white is we have a new party of Hauser and Hendel called Derech Eretz, which is part of the 17 MKs of blue and white, which is now actually going up to 19 MKs. We should say 2 of the 3 MKs of labor are moving over to blue and white, and you have 2 labor MKs and you have 2 together, that's 19. Without them, though, it's 15. Now,
Got it. So,
if
you've been
Netanyahu
cut
has
off.
59,
You've been cut off, Jeremy. So I'm just saying it again. Basically, blue and white at its core is 15, with Yoaz Hendel and Tzvika Hauser. Their 2 party of Derech Eretz makes blue and white 17, even though it's another, it's an addition. And then you have the 2 of labor, Shmuli and Peretz, that broke off, and now they're joining blue and white. So in essence, blue and white is 19, which is 15 of Gantz's blue and white, 2 Tzvika Hauser and Yoaz Hendel, and 2 of labor, Peretz and Shmuli.
So you have 2 options here. One is to take all 19 or 17, or the other is to try to take 2 or 4. Meaning, if there's problems with Benny Gantz, Netanyahu can either bring in just labor or just Derech Eretz, or bring in labor and Derech Eretz, and then he'll have either 61 or 63 without Gantz. This is one of the things that Benny Gantz has started to get really scared about. This is why he's merging with labor and bringing them into his coalition. This is also why he helped Derech Eretz, Hauser and Hendel split away from Telem and then join his blue and white through his Gantz's party is called Israel Resilience, but blue and white is the collection of all of them. So, Netanyahu has some options here. And I've been saying this, and I know that there are some people who don't like it, that considering the issues that we're having with the government that we're trying to form, it's possible that it's worth it for Netanyahu to just wait out the clock and move into the second mandate, and then be able to go ahead and form with, again, 1 or 2 of these small splinter parties. Now, what Rivlin is doing is trying to possibly close this avenue by saying, I'm going to send it all to 21 days. But it's very ironic, and we talked about this with the Supreme Court decision where this was pushed by Benny Gantz and it ended up hurting him. By kicking out Edelstein, it led to the dismantlement of blue and white. I'll remind you, if they didn't push him, Edelstein would still be speaker, blue and white would still be a single faction, and they would still be negotiating with Netanyahu from a point of strength. But because Gantz went to the Supreme Court, brought in an outside force, the consequences were just unintentional from his perspective. But what it ended up doing is it ended up harming him. Here again, if Rivlin decides to go ahead and do that, people are going to freak out. If you go ahead and you cut 6 weeks out of the negotiation process, this is not an easy thing to deal with issues of applying Israeli sovereignty, judicial reform, a lot of the changes, a lot of checks and balances that are needed to bring Gantz and his people into the coalition. It's a lot easier to go ahead and make a deal with just a couple guys than to go ahead and make this deal with equal footing when on one side you have 59 MKs and on the other side you have 15 or possibly at best 19. It's just not equal footing. So if what Rivlin does is he does send us to this, again, we could end up in new elections. Alternatively, Benny Gantz can find himself out of a job and in the opposition as speaker, which again, we haven't had since Avram Borg from 2001 to 2003, but it'll send him out of government because you'll have people who will say to themselves, Hauser and Hendel right now in the last poll that came out, they're at 0.3%. Okay. They're looking at their options here. Benny Gantz doesn't trust them so much. The right wing can offer them a lot for them to come into the government. They can both become ministers. Again, there are some options here. Rivlin, by intervening the same way the Supreme Court intervened, could end up hurting Gantz the same way that it did before. However, it could send us to new elections, just as, possibly the Supreme Court, decision almost did it as well.
So let's put the cards on the table right now. There are realistically 2 options for a government. Option number 1 is a emergency unity government, which up until now has not worked. And I'm going to ask you about those issues in next. And option number two is a small right-wing government of 61, where Orly Levy, who basically just signed on today to be number 59 of that right-wing coalition, and Hauser and Hendel of the Derech Eretz faction. Question is, and again, they hate Bibi. That's why they went in. They're right-wingers in a sense, yet they hate Bibi. That's why they went in the Gantz anti-Bibi coalition. But the question is, what's more important to them? Pushing through right-wing legislation that they can together with a right-wing small government, or going to fourth elections? What do you think they decide if that's the decision?
Well, I said I think both Hauser and Hendel, but also Amir Peretz and Itzik Shmuley, are both looking at the fact that if both of those two-seat small factions go to elections, they're both going to be wiped out. They're going to be unemployed. And I think that's a very big part of leverage when you're looking at, politics. I think, again, they would prefer not to be in this government, but they'd also prefer not to be unemployed. So you have a situation where you get to 61 and you have two options to do that.
Oh, I agree, but I still think there is bigger, and it could be that Labor might join. I just think there's still more realistic that, and I think you'd agree with me also, that Hendel and Hauser would join, as opposed to the left wing, the total left wing faction of Labor of Peretz and Shmuley, both economic left and politically security left, meaning for them it was already they already betrayed their voters by joining blue and white to potentially join a Netanyahu government. Do I think that Peretz and Shmuley will make the jump without blue and white to join a Netanyahu government? I doubt that, even though, yeah, as you're saying, it's still a possibility.
First of all, you want to always have leverage. It's good when you have two parties you can play against each other. I'll remind you, Amir Peretz, when he was in Tzipi Livni's party, he was the environment minister for Netanyahu. So,
right.
It's also Amir Peretz, he left. This is the third, he's killing the Labor Party, but this is the third time he's left the Labor Party. He left to form Am Echad, he left to the Livni party, and I just don't view him as someone as a politician, his views have been very left-wing, but on the other side, we all know that he wants to be president. There are a lot of deals that can be made with Amir Peretz. Itzik Shmuley is a young guy, he just needs to survive. He's put his lot with Amir Peretz. So I think that is, something that could be viable. Yes, Hauser and Hendel ideologically are better suited. The problem is there are issues with Netanyahu. Look, Lieberman is very suited for this government. The problem is that he has issues with Netanyahu personally. So we're at a situation where we just have to exhaust all options. So yeah, Hauser and Hendel is one that I would like better. It's easier for me on the issues, again, of judicial reform and applying Israeli sovereignty, as well as additional issues. If it's economically, if we're looking at the exit plan, a lot of things. But you got to form a government. And again, Benny Gantz could have made a deal. He still can, and he might still will. Let's remember, I told you the day that he broke blue and white, this is the best deal on the table that he can get. Either he's going to take it or he's going to leave it. And he took it. He realized that was the best deal that he could get. But also I explained that was the best deal he could get because he limited his options by forcing Edelstein's hand and the Supreme Court. Here again, Rivlin, again, it's not clear if Gantz asked him or didn't ask him, but you have another situation where his hand is being forced. If he doesn't make a deal with Netanyahu before the deadline, and Rivlin does not extend the deadline, and we go to the 21 days, I just don't see Benny Gantz being able to form he has no coalition to form. I don't see Netanyahu looking to form with him because, again, you get to those points as you do when you're up against deadlines where you see if you could or you cannot make a deal. I think they're going to get there. They're going to see that they can't because, and this is also the ironic thing. It's the same thing where without the Supreme Court, blue and white would still be together today. Without Rivlin going ahead and putting out this ultimatum that you need to make a deal now. If you don't make a deal now, I'm not going to extend the mandate. What he might do is send Benny Gantz out of the government. If he would have given him more time, I think the negotiations, even though they were slow and gradual, again, we're dealing with the coronavirus here, there are things going on. I think it's possible that they would have been able to work it out. I think the fact that they're doing this is going to be very difficult. And we're going to either see a narrow right-wing government of 61 or 63, or we're going to see ourselves in a situation of a fourth election. If we go to the fourth election, like I said, Rivlin deserves a lot of credit for that fourth election, because instead of going presidential, he decided to intervene within this process. But we still have the option, just as we did last time, for Benny Gantz to make a deal at the last minute. And that's what he did last time. It's possible that, again, instead of political suicide, this time he chooses survival. We just don't know.
So let's go back to the emergency national unity talks. From what I understand, three main sticking issues that have stopped a final signing of this agreement. Love to hear if you think that is all true, or this is all smoke and mirrors. Two of them have gotten some airtime. The third has not gotten any attention whatsoever, from what I understand. Number one, the one issue that was a sticking point was sovereignty. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wants to ensure that while we still have President Trump as president before an election, that you don't know who's going to be president after an election, no matter how much we think we might know. And he wants to be able to ensure to be able to apply sovereignty. And blue and white was basically hemming and hawing on that issue. Issue number two was initially, it sounded like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu handed over all the responsibility of the justice system and choosing of judges, etc., to blue and white, to Benny Gantz, and which would be a death blow to the judicial reform the right has been trying to push forward over these years to rebalance the separation of powers that has been trampled on by the justice system in the Supreme Court, and that people on the right were extremely upset about. So it sounds like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stepped back about that and wanted to reevaluate that. And the third open issue that I understand, which hasn't gotten playtime, was that there is a point in the agreement that allows Benny Gantz as Prime Minister substitute, whatever, Mamalei Makom, replaced, whatever the official name is in English, for him to be sworn in as that position the same time period as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would be sworn in. What does that make a difference? The difference it makes is that when the left goes to the Supreme Court saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu shouldn't be able to be Prime Minister, if they decide that that is true, then automatically, immediately, with the start of this new government in a month or two, and a unity government, if it would happen, Benny Gantz would automatically become prime minister, and the Likud wouldn't be able to do anything about it to stop it. What's your feedback about those sticking, supposedly sticking points to signing the agreement?
I mean, there are a lot more than those three. Those three are good. You're correct. The third one is not getting a lot of play, but it's part of a bigger issue. I'll get to that in a moment. In terms of sovereignty, look, Benny Gantz understands if he doesn't give in on that issue, that's the easiest way for us to go to Hauser Hendel and just close the deal with them and end it. I mean, if Hauser and Hendel can say the reason that they went with Netanyahu is because it was the opportunity, the historic moment to be able to apply sovereignty to the Jordan Valley and Northern Dead Sea, that they can explain that to a lot of their voters, a lot of blue and white voters. If anything, they'll become national heroes for a lot of people in the center. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talk about that, but it didn't seem like that was really going to be an issue. The issue was what sort of wording they could come up with. Remember, the idea of freedom of conscience in terms of voting, Lieberman is expected to also vote in favor of that. So it's an issue because there are people in blue and white that have that as an issue, meaning there are people who don't want to see that happen as part of Israel resilience. Obviously, that's not something that the two labor MKs are looking at and enjoying as they're merging their parties. But it's something that, despite being an issue and getting a lot of media time, is not the main issue. And of course, for the most part, that has been worked out. The judicial issue is a big issue. When Ayelet Shaked took the Justice Ministry in 2015, there was an understanding there are other parties and there are other interests going on. So she was justice minister, but when it came to issues of the rabbinical courts, so the one that was leading the charge was the Haredim and not Ayelet Shaked. And this happens a lot within politics, where you have a ministry, but certain authority is given to someone else. That's what you do in coalition agreements. It happens all the time, for instance, in the religious services ministry between UTJ and Shas, and sometimes as well within the religious Zionist parties. Many examples of this, even in less sectoral type portfolios. But what we had here was Blue and White, who thought by getting the justice ministry, that meant they were getting everything. And what we could explain to them is you can have the justice ministry. We have to talk now about what it is you're going to get and not get out of it. One of the things that came up, which was a big issue, was the committee that selects judges. Briefly, you have 3 Supreme Court justices that sit on that committee, the 3 with the highest seniority, which are all people that were appointed before Netanyahu's time, of course. There's only 4 of those left, by the way. Most of them over the last 11 years have been appointed during Netanyahu's term. You have 2 lawyers from the Bar Association. You have 2 Knesset members, and you have 2 ministers. Now, what Blue and White thought they were getting, along with the justice minister, which, by the way, the justice minister sits on that committee automatically and also chairs that committee, that they were going to get the extra minister on that committee, and that they were going to get both MKs that are on that committee, meaning they thought they were getting 4 seats on the 9-seat panel that chooses judges. The law is that you need to get a minimum of 7 votes out of 9. So that would give Blue and White veto power over any candidate. So obviously that was something that was not going to happen, because we know that there are other partners of the right-wing bloc that care about these issues. Like I said, for instance, rabbinical courts is something the Haredim care about. But when it comes to Yamina, we care very much about the appointment of judges. We take a lot of pride in the fact that we appointed 6 Supreme Court justices with Ayelet Shaked, as well as the fact that overall about 1/3 of the judges overall were switched out during Ayelet Shaked's term, including adding on a lot of new conservative judges to sort of build a new farm system in that area. Now, giving over that entire platform over to Blue and White goes ahead and rolls back a lot of the movement that has been made on this issue. And it's also curious because Netanyahu himself is dealing with so many legal issues that were caused by the establishment, that for him to go ahead and put people who are pro-establishment in these positions and go against the reform that's been underway for the last 4 or 5 years, which has continued, I should say, with Likud Justice Minister Amir Ohana, is very peculiar. But again, you go into an emergency unity government, you come to agreements, and you need to say, okay, so you're a justice minister, but there are certain things you're not going to get. And here it became an issue. They said, no, what is this? If you're justice minister, you get everything. If, for instance, you're foreign minister, you get everything. If you're education minister, you get everything. Again, the Haredim are like, well, what about our schools? Even the Arabs were like, well, what about our schools? Like, it's just very, I've talked about this a lot. The fact that the Israel Resilience Party are a bunch of people that have very little political experience. None of them are former MKs before this whole process. The only one now that is actually an MK with political experience is Pnina, the Ethiopian MK that switched over and switched out the Druze MK.
And again, you're referring to Benny Gantz's party, just to clarify for people.
Yes, Benny Gantz's party is filled with a lot of people who I personally like. Some of them, they're great people. A lot of them have experience, I should say, in municipal politics. So it's not that they're complete rookies, but they're a bunch of people that have very little, and a lot of them 0 experience in terms of politics on the national level. And excluding the people with municipal experience, a majority of their list are people that have 0 experience in politics. And if I were to ask them right now, what are the names of all of the ministries, they would not be able to answer it, even after spending over a year running for Knesset. Frequently, I still have situations where I bump into them and they ask me how to get to a certain committee room in the Knesset because they don't know. Again, it's a little bit embarrassing. I can tell you in most parties that have good farm systems and youth groups and so on and so forth, all the people coming in know all 12 names of the statutory committees within the Knesset and what floor they're on, and they don't need to ask how to get to the bathroom. So it's a different situation when it comes to these people, and because of that, when you're having negotiations, they're just not so sharp when it comes to a lot of these things. And that brings us to the third issue, which you talked about, which is they've come up with a lot of original thinking in terms of legislation. One of the interesting things, which you mentioned, is that they want them to indeed make it a law.
They want to make it a what, Jeremy? We're waiting for Jeremy to be unfrozen. He's talking to us right now about my third point, asking him that one of the sticking points.
Gantz will.
We lost you, Jeremy. We lost you. We lost you. Thank you for coming back. Start again in terms of they wanting Benny Gantz to be sworn in together with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu right at the beginning. That's where we lost you.
So what they want to do is to change the law, because the current law does not allow Benny Gantz to automatically be prime minister. He would need to rely on Netanyahu and the government resigning and allowing him to form it. So they want to change the law so that when Netanyahu is sworn in, that Benny Gantz is officially the person, the designate. You have different things in law of the deputy prime minister, the vice prime minister. I'm not going to go ahead and bore you in that, but they want to create a new position called the Memale Makom, the replacement of the prime minister, and that person will automatically become prime minister when the prime minister resigns, and if not, then at a certain date he will automatically become prime minister. Now, this is a bit ridiculous because obviously the members of the coalition can always resign their posts at any point and topple the coalition. But this is something that they feel is very, very important. When I've mentioned this to my friends in blue and white, they're like, okay, so then we'll go into elections with Benny Gantz being the interim prime minister. Okay, good luck with that, as the saying goes. But another thing that's interesting.
Wait, I don't understand that. I don't understand. What are they trying to say? What's the point that they're trying to say? Have him go into elections as interim prime minister?
I'm saying, let's say that Netanyahu resigns in a year and a half, whatever it is, and Benny Gantz becomes prime minister, and then Shas UTJ and Yamina all leave the coalition, and boom, he has no coalition, just with Likud and blue and white. It's not 61. And then you have a situation where no one else is going to want to jump and help Benny Gantz be prime minister after he became prime minister on the backs of opposition. So then he'd be prime minister, but we would be going to an early election at the end of the conclusion of Netanyahu's term. He could even say, because my partners caused this, then I'm going to run for election now for prime minister again for a full term. So their argument is that, okay, well, we'll at least be prime minister during that election period.
Like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now, even though we don't have a government.
Correct. They're saying he would be in that position. Which again, I'm like, okay, yes, because of the default, he would be prime minister, but he would be prime minister for a very short time, not the amount of time that's promised to him within the agreements that are supposedly being voted in. Another one of the interesting laws he wants to do is he wants to change the Norwegian law. As I mentioned beforehand, you have this situation where blue and white split up, and you have different people that are on different lists. You have the Eshatid people, you have the Telem people. I should mention, in terms of the Telem people, some of them are still with Telem, some of them have broken off and they're part of Derech Eretz. Telem put up, I think it was 9 names or 10 names on the list. Most of them were not necessarily in the most realistic of spots, but there are people who can potentially come in now. One of the things that they want to do is change the law so that the Norwegian would work in a way that it's not the next person up on the list according to the number, but it's the next person on the number according to their party affiliation. That would allow people to get in and switch around. I'll give you an example. One of the people that's coming up close is a Yesh Atid MK Tehila Friedman, sorry, candidate, not a, she left Yesh Atid. She's not a MK, she never was, but she's a candidate that was registered as Yesh Atid. She.
Okay. Jeremy froze again. He's referring to the situation, the law that Blue and White is trying to pass, right, as part of these unity negotiations, where the Norwegian law, if someone becomes a minister, then someone, meaning they would no longer be a Chaver Knesset, a parliamentarian. So the next person on the list would come in. Because Blue and White is this whole list of 35, even though they all broke off. Yesh Atid broke off from Benny Gantz's. Sorry, you froze again, Jeremy, so I went into it. Yes. You were talking about the Yesh Atid person who left Yesh Atid. She's next on the list.
So she's not next on the list. I mean, she's there's a guy.
Okay, having technical issues with Jeremy right now. Again, so the issue he's referring to is they're trying to have this law passed so that they could decide that the next person who comes in to fill the parliamentarian spot who became a minister would be someone from their list and not from the full party list of Blue and White. Because again, they were a party of 35. So there was numbers were different. First there's a Yesh Atid, then there's a Chosen Yisrael, someone from beginning Benny Gantz's, then Telem of Bugi Ya'alon, and they were all mixed up, mishkabobbled in there as a whole long list. So they want to change the law to this Norwegian law that if somebody of Blue and White, if someone of Blue and White of Benny Gantz becomes prime minister, becomes a minister, then you with me, Jeremy?
I'm with you. Can you?
All right. Keep on going. I was just trying to fill in to explain.
So again, the point is they want to change the law so that instead of the number mattering, that it's the party affiliation, and it's not just the party affiliation that was registered, but the party affiliation based on when they decide to be sworn into the Knesset. This is a very interesting way to go about it. It allows you to skip numbers on the list so that people that are affiliated with Yair Lapid or Bogi Ya'alon will not be part of the Knesset, but you will have new MKs that come in that are affiliated either with Gantz or with Hauser and Hendel. So there's a series of them. I'm not going to bore you, but those are two very important ones. There's a series of legislation that they want to put in order to change the rules of the game. And this is also where the idea where Rivlin is cutting 6 weeks worth of negotiations out to be an issue. I can tell you that idea in terms of letting people on the list, depending on what number they are in the party, that's something that could, for instance, work very well with UTJ. That could also work within the Yamina in terms of people that are in different spots. For instance, if Moti Yogev decides to go against Rafi Peretz for the leadership of Bayit Yehudi, he's the next one on the list for Bayit Yehudi. He would have the opportunity to then go ahead and replace him in Knesset if he won. There's a lot of potential things for other parties. So again, a lot of this legislation, excluding the one piece of legislation that has to deal with the prime minister, Memolei Makom, which anyways you can pass because whether you appoint it or not is up to whatever deal you're going to put forth. There's a lot of things that you can do right now that enable you to be able to do this national emergency unity government, that allow you to be able to move forward by going ahead and making it a much shorter time frame. What Rivlin does is, again, make it more difficult to be able to move forward. Because now to move forward in a situation where you don't have the time to resolve the last minute issues on applying Israeli sovereignty, the judicial issue, the various legislation that's needed for Gantz to feel good in terms of his ego, but also to deal with members of his own faction, considering that he split Blue and White. There's just so many things that need to be done. That's without talking about again, issues that need to be dealt with in religious services ministries, education, as well as some of the other smaller ministries. We still don't know in terms of distribution of portfolios within the bloc, within the Likud. There's just so much to be done. And the thought process that you can just do this in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days is just very difficult to imagine. What you can do is, and this reminds me of 2015, is wing it. I remember this. I was with some journalists and some ambassadors, and we're watching Netanyahu go up in 2015, where he ended up getting 61 votes. He did not know when he went up whether he had the votes for the government or if he did not. On the way up to the podium, he made a series of decisions of who's a minister and who's not a minister. And based on how he read it out, people decided if they were going to prove it or not. I remember I spoke with Benny Begin afterwards. He said, I didn't know that I was going to be a minister until Netanyahu announced me as a minister from the podium. Gilad Ardan was not named as a minister, but he did come in and he voted. There was just a lot of very interesting things that happened. You can always have that type of situation where you have a vote, where you just say stuff, nothing is in writing, you just make it up on the spot. But again, if that's what Rivlin is trying to send us towards, and he was an MK who he wasn't an MK at that point, he was already president, but I'm saying he's an MK who's he was his president, he was there for that. He knows how chaotic this can be. I think that again, he should revisit his decision to go ahead and force us into the 21 days, and again, choose one of the 3 other options that he has available.
So once again, Jeremy, it is amazing getting your insight. Again, for people who are just coming in or out or just joining at the end, final sentence, final 2-minute soundbite for those. What's going on? We want the government to happen already. Is there going to be a government? Is there not going to be a government? What do you say, Jeremy? What's your final 2-minute soundbite of the situation?
If Rivlin decides to either A, extend Gantz's mandate, B, do another round of consultations, or C, go ahead and give Netanyahu the second mandate, I think that if he chooses any one of those 3, we will most likely end up having a government, and it probably will include Benny Gantz. If we go straight to the 21 days, there's really only 2 options. One is that Netanyahu is able to form a government without Benny Gantz, either with Derech Eretz of Hauser and Handel, or the breakaway of labor of Peretz and Shmueli, or the second option is a 4th election. I don't see a situation in forcing the 21 days that will lead to Benny Gantz being able to be a part of the government. It's possible that during that time he will pursue legislation against Netanyahu. However, if you're looking at the schedule, you still have Chol Moed, Pesach, Pesach Sheni, Yom HaShoah, Yom HaTzmaut, Yom HaZikaron. I just don't see him being able to go ahead and pass everything that he would want to pass during that time. But if we do end up in that situation, it's because Rivlin didn't give both sides time to be able to come to an agreement. And that election, if it does happen, if Netanyahu's not able to find a narrow right-wing government, will be on his shoulders, similarly to the Supreme Court decision that led to the breakup of blue and white and prevented any chance that Benny Gantz had from being able to get something substantial.
Jeremy Saltan, Knesset insider, political consultant, thank you so much once again for your insights. Hopefully more people are a little more knowledgeable about the latest and greatest in our never boring political world here in Israel. So on that note, Jeremy, Moadim L'Simcha, enjoy the Chag, and looking forward to the next time. We need some clarification from you.
No problem. Have a good one. Moadim L'Simcha.
Chagim Zvanim L'Sason, Avi Abelow for the Pulse of Israel, signing off from our eternal and ancestral homeland. Thank you everyone for watching. Shalom from the homeland.